everyone. Welcome to today's webcast. This is Geek Out on the best practices of a Google Apps deployment. Carl, we're getting started right now. Appreciate you. Phil, we've got Lorca, Bobby, Brian, Dave, and many others already dropping questions into us. What we do have planned today is try and address as many of those questions as we can. My name is James Hilliard. Happy to be on board as the moderator for today's event, this webcast obviously being brought to you by Google. We've got a full table here with us to chat today. I want to introduce our team. Serena Sadia-Sai is on board. She's a product marketing manager with Google and joins us again on one of our webcasts. And Serena, thanks for being here.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure.
We have three of Google's apps deployment specialists listed. Two of them have made it. Jim Copeland couldn't be here today, traveling abroad, but Dan Kennedy and Marcelo Peterson are on board with us. So to Dan and Marcelo, I say, guys, thanks for taking the time and joining us today.
Thanks, James. Good to be here.
A couple of things we're going to address. I'll go through that really quickly, and then we'll actually get into our content, a couple poll questions, and then dive into what we've got planned for today. But really we want to talk about, we'd mentioned some of the promo material, the idea of a big bang. So we're going to tell you what's included, what's not included in a big bang. We're going to talk about some of the migration tools and services available to you all, and then also talk about how you can customize your org's deployment of Google Apps. I've already seen a bunch of questions in the queue kind of getting to that point. So we will be addressing those and hopefully a lot more in today's presentation. First piece of interactivity today is checking in with a poll question, and this gives us a little feedback here in terms of your awareness level of Google Apps. This time we put right at the top that maybe you are already a Google Apps customer. Then following in order, maybe you're not familiar, you're somewhat familiar, you're currently doing some type of evaluation for a near-term need that your org has, or you might be considering apps as part of a longer-term strategies. We see via our attendee list a good amount of customers that we're familiar with that are looking at Google right now. So welcome to you as well, being on board today. Questions and comments, you can go ahead and drop those in the lower portion of the player, and just make sure you click the submit button there so we can get you queued up and, again, answer as many questions as we can. Dan and Marcelo are going to kind of be keeping a drifting eye on the questions as they come in, so we'll try and mix some of those in during the presentation as we go forward. Also, we'll have hopefully a good 10, 15 minutes or so for some Q&A at the tail end of the presentation. With that, the results of the poll question, thank you all for voting on that. 28% of you, just by a slim margin, get the single highest vote there that you're already a Google Apps customer. Putting together those that are evaluating right now, we've got close to 50% of you either for a near-term or a longer-term strategy. Because we have so many people pretty familiar with what's going on with Google Apps, as I turn it to Serena, we're going to do just a brief overview, try and get you 11% or so quickly up to speed on what the offerings are. And then for all the rest of you that are customers or are familiar, again, most of the time here is spent talking in a little more detail, talking about a Google Apps deployment, what it can mean for you, et cetera. So with that, submit those questions and comments. Serena, I turn it over to you for that quick overview.
Great. Thanks, James. Just for the folks who don't have a whole lot of familiarity with Google Apps, a couple of things you should note is that we're part of a enterprise division, Dan, Marcelo, and I, that are committed to providing solutions for IT for enterprises and schools and organizations. In addition to Google Apps, our division provides the Google Search Appliance, for example, if you want to use Google.com search algorithms behind your firewall to find information, to help your employees find information across multiple content repositories. We also offer enterprise versions of our Google Maps and Earth products, and we find that a lot of government agencies in particular use Google Earth to map out government information services, and if people are interested in that, you can take a look at a Google case study called Virtual Alabama, where the state of Alabama basically mapped out a lot of really great county level and city level information. And many people use Google Maps to do things like fleet tracking or other types of asset tracking. Of course, if you're a real estate company, et cetera, many people use Google Maps integrated to help them show their listings to consumers. And finally, Postini services are part of the Google Apps suite of products and are essentially Google Message Security and an archiving and discovery solution also offered in the cloud, just like Google Apps. Google Apps Premier Edition is really many different applications. It includes a suite of messaging applications and a suite of collaboration applications. I think one thing to note is that Gmail is essentially the flagship application, and it has built-in spam protection as well as a 25 gigabyte inbox for storage. We also provide the ability to integrate shared calendars, if you will, and integrated instant messaging via your browser. So if you want to do voice or video chat or plain text chat, you can using your corporate domain identity. Our second suite of applications really fall under collaboration, and they include Google Sites and Google Docs and Google Video for Business. Most of our customers are really deploying Google apps in terms of messaging, first and foremost, and are building their business cases off of messaging. And then what they find is the collaboration apps are what get their employees excited long term. And Dan and Marcella will talk a little bit more about that. All of these applications are provided in the cloud, and they are based upon our 24/7, 365 customer support, 99.9% uptime SLA, the ability for you to access the information from anywhere, whether you have a smartphone or your desktop or your computer from home. All you really need is a computer connection, internet connection and computer to access your Google Apps. And for Google Apps Premier Edition, of course, if people are familiar with Gmail on a consumer basis, you can turn off the ads. This is just a quick summary of what's in Google Apps Premier Edition. I encourage you to go visit the website for more information that's listed below. The price is a little over $4 per user per month, and that annualizes to $50 per user per month. And you can buy 1 seat, 1,000 seats, or 100,000 seats. There's no minimum. I did mention our Postini services. I'm not going to talk a lot about them here. But you can purchase these standalone, or Google Message Security is included in Google Apps, and that provides an additional layer of spam and virus protection, as well as content monitoring and filtering. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marcelo.
Well, thanks, Serena. Good morning, evening, and afternoon for everybody out there. Our first slide that we're going to be talking about here before we go into the technical details of the presentation, what we like to call the geek out part, which is the fun part for us, we're going to give you a high-level overview of what a Google Apps project plan usually looks like. There are 4 phases to it, what we call plan, pilot, plan, deploy. What most companies go through is a planning phase where they try to decide how long do they want to pilot Google Apps to see if it's a fit for their organization. They define some success criteria on what makes Google Apps successful to see if they want to go forward with Google Apps. And also they decide who's going to be in this pilot. Usually it's an IT group or and with some key individuals from your business folks. So after that planning, we move into a pilot phase where we have what we like to call at Google the alpha wave of users. They start using our products. They start using Gmail, Google Talk, Google Calendar. The IT team's goal during this phase is to track any problems that you have during the pilot, see if there's any gaps that you're trying to that you have to resolve before your deployment, and also get some success stories, right? This starts helping you build awareness of Google Apps and also help marketing this to some folks, and I'm sure there will be some talk in the halls of your organization saying that we're trying Google Apps, and that's a cool thing, and this is your first the first time that IT goes out there and talks about Google Apps. Of course, here, very important for you to support the users in the pilot. You don't want to let them be out there by themselves with no support. But after this phase is done and we move to the second planning phase, you have some lessons learned from your alpha wave. You try to understand, do you have to change anything on your technical approach? Do you have to create some more training material? You should get some feedback from your users. How difficult was them to get from whatever systems they have today to Google Apps? How fast did they become productive on Google Apps? Do they need more help? Do they need less help? This is where you try to identify those areas is during this planning phase. And then once you have this planning phase done, it's showtime, right? It's getting all your users on the system and it start thinking about how do we decommission the old legacy system so we can start saving some money and we can start enjoying Google Apps. So for our presentation today, our focus is really on the last two boxes here, the planning and the deployment, because we think that a lot of you guys out there are already you already think Google Apps is a fit for you, so we are really talking about the last piece of planning and deployment. So for somebody like Carl out there in the audience who just said that he's planning deployment tomorrow evening, this is very timely for you. So with that, let's move on to the next slide, which is actually called focus, because the most important thing that we find is to determine what is your core focus for your deployment. What are you going to deploy to your users, and what are you going to spend the majority of your time with training, support, writing technical material, deploying technical solutions. And from the feedback that we hear a lot from our customers here is that messaging, our messaging suite of products, which is Gmail, Talk, and Calendar, are usually the core focus of every deployment. And the reasons are it is probably the most disruptive piece to your organization because you're usually changing your existing users from their legacy system to this new system. You require some training because this is again, your users are so used to doing something already that they now they're going into this new environment, and this is true for every IT project, where you spend more time making sure that they're comfortable with the new system, that they're given all the training that they need. Now, we also have our collaboration suite of products, which is Docs, Sites, and Video. We hear a lot from our customers that they do what's called a soft launch, where they allow their users to start using this, so there's some organic growth of Google Apps. Their users have access to it. Usually there is minimum support from the help desk, but this is not actively marketed to your organization as something that you're deploying, that you're focusing on. Once your users are up to speed, they can be productive on email and Talk and Calendar. Then we think that's good to introduce the other suite of products and start marketing around that. And that keeps your users always interested in what's coming next. And I think that's always a win for IT. So with that, we're going to move on to our next slide, which is the timeline considerations. So how fast do we deploy Google Apps? You buy Google Apps, you're paying $50 per user. I'm sure you want to start getting your users using it as soon as possible so you can start thinking about when do I decommission my old system and how fast can I get this moving. We've heard that there are a few drivers around this. Some of them are divided. Some of them come from the business. You're trying to save money. Some of them are some technical drivers. You may have some other projects going at the same time. For example, we have here, you're trying to do a directory consolidation, for example, that you may be dependent on Google Apps. Or, for example, there's a critical system that's in place, so you want to make sure that's well integrated before you launch Google Apps. And then the last piece here in the technical driver is the coexistence investment is, do you have to keep Google Apps and another system live at the same time? Do your users do they need to live on their legacy system, doing emailing each other from between Google Apps and your legacy system? Do they need to have calendar interop where they're sending meetings to each other? So there's a certain amount of investment that goes in here to make sure that that's also working very well so your users have a good experience. Now, from the business side, you may have some licensing agreements that are coming due, and you have a big bill coming that you want to try to avoid. There's some other some other considerations here on how fast you can go. For example, a lot of companies we work with don't do a lot of disruptive changes during their end of the year holidays or maybe end of the fiscal year for some of you guys out there. And the other part here is perhaps the business has asked IT for for a new solution for collaboration or a new solution for mail, or your email system is dying and you need to get it replaced. So you have some goals as your IT organization to get Google Apps in place as soon as possible. So that's another usual driver that we hear very often during our deployments. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass it on to Dan Kennedy, who is going to be talking about the one of the approaches to deployment.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Glad to have everyone with us. So, one of the things that we talk about with all of the customers that we're dealing with is, what's the best way? Once you've decided, hey, you know what, we are going to move to Google Apps in our infrastructure, we're going to decommission our legacy infrastructure, or at least pieces of it, and you're committed to that. What's the best way? And we've got several questions in the queue today about what's the best way to roll this out. And so here at Google, we've kind of decided upon this term that we call Big Bang, and the Big Bang deployment. And there's a little bit of confusion. I think everybody out there, in the IT world has done this idea of a Big Bang migration, and it probably conjures up a lot of different images of what that really means. So we've tried to narrow it down in terms of a definition, and really what we're getting across here is in that plan, pilot, plan, deploy concept, we're looking at it in the last pieces. By no means are we advocating that, hey, you sign your Google Apps contract and in 2 weeks you're deploying your last Google Apps user. We know that's not really a relevant idea, and that's certainly not something that we're going to try to force on our users and our customers. So really in those last two segments, that plan and deploy segment, once you've made the commitment and you've got your IT resources all lined up, what we're telling people is that the faster we can start to take that general Office user case, not your Google Guides, not the advocates, not the early alpha wave adopters, once we start moving the generic everyday users, we try to do that as quickly as possible with a concentrated effort around the long-term pieces, the things that are going to really make our deployment successful, training, support, communications. And this gives us a lot of benefits, and of course we have a few watch points inside of that as well. And really what this allows us to do from the IT perspective is it gives our IT groups the ability to focus on what they're going to be doing for the long haul and all the things that are really going to matter in the long term. Having the best sites collaboration, having all the pieces of Gmail that, to focus on, the best possible training so that the end user, which is really what's going to make or break your migration, what's going to make everything look either successful or look like there were too many challenges through, is how transparent the move is for the end user. And that's what this approach really allows us to do. What our customers have told us throughout with each large-scale deployment that we've done is that the best thing that they decided to do was to really concentrate the investment and the focus of all the groups involved, especially IT, and really be concentrated on getting everyone from the beginning point to the end point in a relatively short period of time. Some of the watch points that we've seen with this kind of rollout when you're doing things so concentrated, change management policies and understanding everything around those, requiring planning and good communication strategy, having templates, knowing exactly when I'm going to send out which communication, to who is it going to go, and understanding all the pieces around that. And then data migration. And this is a piece I think we've also seen some questions come in on this, and having a very thought out and thoroughly explained strategy to the user so they know when things are going to be available, how much of it's going to be available, and if there's going to be any times where, hey, I may need to go to an older system to access some archives or something like that. And we're going to be going through some data migration pieces here and talking about what other customers have done and some of the options. One thing we like to do here at Google is, of course, give our customers lots of options in terms of what they can do. And this slide that's coming up in a few minutes on data migration will show that you have a lot of different choices when dealing with how much data, when to do the data, and things like that. All right, so moving on, we're going to go in and we're going to get down to some of the more technical pieces here, and a small, quick overview on some of the slides that are coming up, just so everyone, and I know people have been emailing on each of these topics, lots of mobile questions, lots of user provisioning questions that have come up. So user provisioning and the way that we integrate with our LDAP, we need to, of course, make sure that account creation is as simple as possible. We need to identify where our source of truth directory is going to come from, and how do we make it so that you're not maintaining just another system, another application inside the cloud now, and how do we integrate with what you already have. Your mail flow architecture, one thing that we like to make sure that all of our customers are aware of is that your mail flow architecture, when you do something like this, is going to change. No longer is your MX record going to point at your gateway, which will then route into your spam filtering solution, which will then go to your document management system, which will then go into your on-prem mail system or something like that. We're going to have some routing changes, and we're going to talk about some of those and what we feel the best strategies around those. Mobile, we definitely have support for the most popular mobile platforms out there, so we want to get into talking a little bit about those. And then your single sign-on and password sync and authentication strategies, of course. How are users going to get into the system? What makes it secure? Things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Inside your existing environment, we're also going to talk a little bit about coexistence and what do we recommend, or what have we seen successful at other customers when it comes to keeping the systems intact, having some users in one place and others, some people in Gmail and others in your current system. How does that work, and what are the caveats around some of the setups? Migration tools and how they're installed, and really anything from Google that needs to get installed throughout the environment. Of course, it's a cloud computing platform. We try to keep everything inside the cloud. However, there may be times where whether it's a migration tool or another tool that you've decided to deploy because it helps your end users, circumstances around your software delivery mechanism and what those tools, the impact those tools will have. And then, of course, network consideration. You're moving to the cloud. We have some situations where your proxy, your firewall, and these kind of things may need to have some small modifications, or things that we would like, what we will need to have accessible via your network at all times for all of your users. All right, so with that, let's talk about, first off, we're going to talk about Google Apps Directory Sync and how it works. And I saw a question from Colin that had come in earlier talking about how do we provision users? Is this a system where now I'm just managing another application with another set of maintenance and administration for user provisioning and group provisioning and contact provisioning? And the answer to that is no. And the reason for that is an application that Google provides free of charge called Google Apps Directory Sync, aka GADS. And what this does is it does a query of your LDAP server for whatever type of objects. And these are all very, very, very configurable in terms of I only want to provision users or groups or contacts or all these different things. Goes out to Google, identifies what Google has in its system, does a comparative check against the two lists, and then updates Google based on your LDAP system. So a couple of things to think about here. It is fully configurable for different and custom field names, different OUs. So if you only want to sync from one OU because only part of your business is using Google Apps at some point, maybe in a pilot or something like that, absolutely configurable. Your LDAP system is never altered. We never write to your LDAP system. We only read, and we make updates on the Google side. It is always done, as you see here in our diagram, it is always done in a secure manner over a secure connection with HTTPS. So we don't have the issue of a man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. So it's always done securely. We have the ability to run multiple syncs. So if you are unable to figure out a way, or you have multiple apps instances or something like that, we can actually do multiple syncs with the application. And this really works great when you have a termination process or a new hire process and bringing people on board or offboarding people and trying to figure out the best way to automate the processes of a new hire or a termination, which I think all of us have gone through at some point with every system. We have the ability to do exclusions and do very, very complex rules based on different types of regex expressions, LDAP filters. So we have quite a few pieces of our directory sync application that allow you to customize it. So with that, we're going to move on, but I do want to just specify that this Google Apps Directory Sync is a very, very flexible, very log-oriented, detailed application that can let you get pretty much anything from your existing LDAP system into Google Apps in a very, very quick manner. It can be automated via batch and via cron and things like that, so that it really takes the stress out of having to do user maintenance and user administration on a daily basis.
Just a reminder to our audience that Dan Kennedy and Marcelo Peterson are with us today. Jim Copeland couldn't make it, but we're talking with these guys. We've had some more folks join us since the beginning of the presentation. We're about halfway through. We have well over, I think it was over 150 questions or so that have already come in. So, folks, just a reminder at this point, we're not going to get to all of them today. But what we will do is forward them on to the Google team so we can continue to not only address questions on the event, but follow up with you after this webcast as well. So just wanted to throw that in there. That should not keep you from submitting more questions and comments. We can keep these folks busy after this webcast is done. So keep doing that. And with that, I believe I'm probably throwing it back to you, Marcelo, and we'll move forward.
Actually, I'm gonna keep going. I got one or two more, but
cool.
Thanks, James. And so moving on, guys, we're moving on to another one of the technical topics that we had discussed, and that is mail flow. So inside the Google Apps Enterprise Suite of products, we also have the Postini system, which we call Google Message Security. So Google Message Security plays a vital role in all of our recommended deployments. And what we always recommend to customers, and what our customers have told us has always been successful with that, is using this Google Message Security to help facilitate mail flow. One of the great ways that the Google Message Security helps us is with this very, very simple diagram. I think we all know when it comes to MX records, we're kind of at the mercy of, we tell things where to go, and that's what we get, and that's really all we have. And then it becomes lots of little trickery and forwarding and rules and things like that to get mail to route to different places if we need it to. So what Google Message Security, formerly Postini, can help us do is set up a very, very simple split delivery setup where inbound mail flows into the system, and then based on simple routing rules, which are a one-time setup and very, very easy to do, they can flow mail to whatever system we need it to, whether it be Google, whether it be to your mail gateway or anywhere else. This is something that we recommend doing very, very early in the migration process. It helps facilitate the pilot, the alpha wave, moving users over days instead of all in one fell swoop. So that's something that we always have. We always try to get customers to understand very early on in the process and understand how it can help the deployment. Also in Google Message Security is where you'll handle spam and virus settings for your domain. There's tons and tons of granular settings, whether it be on a per user, or per group, or any other type of administrative gathering, grouping. So one thing also that this helps us is that this allows us, if there was an issue ever experienced with flowing mail into Google and something was not working exactly as we needed to, that on a per user basis we can actually back out single users at a time or multiple users at a time to start routing their mail back to the legacy mail system, which is, I think everyone in IT understands, is a very, very, very important role in any big deployment, being able to take a user or a group of users for some unforeseen circumstances, which we, of course, hope will never come through. Also, in the Google Message Security product line is the Google Message Discovery, which is our e-discovery platform. So if you decide to go with the e-discovery platform, which is perfect for all those litigation circumstances and the immutable storage of all of your messages, this is where that would also happen. So this system would be required in that scenario. All right, so moving on from mail flow, we're going to hit the next slide, which is talking about mobile. And, of course, especially when it comes to executives and your quote-unquote VIP users, the mobile platform is very, very important. And what we've done at Google is we've built in support inside of Google Apps for all of the main messaging platforms out there. So the first one that we want to talk about is Google Sync for BlackBerry Enterprise Server. So I think what Google's done is created a plugin that lives on the standard BlackBerry Enterprise Server and allows you to give the native BlackBerry experience with a Gmail backend. So your users are not interrupted in what they're used to from a user interface standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, and inside of the IT world, it gives us the flexibility of all the things that BlackBerry Enterprise Server has always given us. So security policies, all the pieces that were there before are still there. We also support ActiveSync. So things like iPhones and some of the other phones that support ActiveSync, we have we have several security policies that are now built into Google Apps around lockout of the device and things like that, password complexity, and those type of things are now supported natively inside of Google Apps that an administrator can manage. And of course, what Google will always tell you is that the wave of mobile computing in the future is going to be the Android product. So we have native support for Android, and if anyone's used Android on Google Apps, you know that it's a very, very simple two-step process that you put in your username and account, your password, and we automatically sync all of your contacts, your calendar, your email, and it is a very, very seamless setup. So that's the mobile piece of things, and I know we have some questions that I'm going to tackle later on mobile, but right now I'm going to throw it back to Marcelo, who's going to take us through the next few slides.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. We have a lot of questions coming up, so I'm going to try to move this along quickly so we can get some of those questions and answers for you guys. My next slide that I will be talking about here is the infrastructure integration of Google Apps. Coming from the IT background before working on Google Apps, I've dealt with a lot of proxy firewalls and ports and all of that stuff that all of us have spent probably many Friday nights trying to figure out why something was not working. I can guarantee to you that Google Apps is probably one of the easiest things to configure in your environment from a proxy standpoint. As long as your proxy allows the user's browser to connect to the Google URLs over HTTPS, you don't have to configure anything else. You have in the Google control panel, you have the option to turn on HTTPS or just leave as HTTP. Most of our customers use HTTPS, so it's a secure connection, and we support your proxy. And most of our applications, like Dan talked before, our directory sync tool also supports proxy configuration. So from a proxy standpoint, it's fairly simple. From a firewall standpoint, it's even easier because you only have to worry about one port, and that's, again, port 443 for HTTPS traffic if you're doing HTTPS, which we strongly recommend. Even for all of our suite of applications, including Gmail, Calendar, Google Talk, all of our APIs, our directory sync tool, they all use encrypted traffic on port 443. And as long as your firewall allows that, which we usually don't have problems with companies that don't allow that type of traffic, you usually don't have a problem. So if you worked on a voice over IP project in the past, or any project that required hundreds of ports and very complex firewall configurations, Google Apps would be very easy for you. And the final piece is something that's actually very important, and I think is very important for every enterprise, regardless if they're using Google Apps or not, is SPF records. SPF records, for you guys that don't know, is when you actually specify which email hosts are allowed to email on your behalf. So, for example, you only allow your own email servers and Google Apps to email on your behalf. So what this does, it actually helps reduce spam detection, and it helps us ensure that who is sending that message from your domain is really on your domain, is really approved by you, by IT to send this. This is configured with your DNS provider, and just like everything that we have in this presentation, we have a lot of documentation on our help site that we're going to be talking a little bit about later. But these are the usual infrastructure integration points from a network security and network access standpoint. So with that in mind, we're going to move to the next slide, which is the other piece of infrastructure integration, which is usually large customers that we're working with. They use single sign-on. Single sign-on is a way of you controlling the sign-on experience for your users. We had a few questions on this I can see in the Q&A. For example, we had somebody ask, how can I control how can I make sure that my users change passwords every 60 to 90 days? Or how can I control who uses the system? You can either use our native authentication mechanism, where you have your users logged in directly to Google, or you can use single sign-on. What single sign-on does, it gives you a way to manage the user identities in a single store. So if we look at this diagram here, and we're going to quickly go left to right, your users using their iPhones, their any Google plugin or the browser, they're going to Google Apps, and Google Apps is connecting to your single sign-on system for authentication. Your single sign-on system would then check against your own password store to see if that user is authenticated. During that process, you can require the user to reset passwords. You can also implement password complexities, like one of the questions that we had in Q&A. This is where you do this. You have full control of your user access. It requires you to have a single sign-on system. We have several partners out there that do single sign-on. A lot of companies are already investing in single sign-on for their web-based applications, like some internal URLs or internal domains that you may have. And the other thing that you could also implement is a password synchronization mechanism, so that your company's password is also synchronized with Google, of course, all over a secure connection, so that for applications that do not support single sign-on, which is a SAML protocol, your users can still access those applications without having to remember two different passwords. So with that in mind, I'm going to be moving to the next topic, which is a little bit of change here, but is data migration, another interesting and important task on your Google Apps deployment. What we have found is that we want to first define a strategy for migration. One size doesn't fit all is what we believe in. First, you have to understand what do you want to migrate. Some companies want to do archives, or they want to do personal contacts. Some companies want to do calendar. They want to do full-blown migration. How you want to migrate it, we have tools available. We have several partners as well that have tools available for GroupWise, Lotus Notes, Exchange. Do you do a server-side migration or client-side migration? A server-side migration is where IT controls the entire migration. They are the ones who go into the user's mailbox on the servers and grab the information and sends to Google. Whereas a client-side migration, your users have control to do that. You usually installed something on their own computers, so they have full control of when do they want to migrate, what do they want to migrate, and you usually are not, IT is not involved in that process except for supporting the users and usually pushing those applications. And the last piece is who do you want to migrate and how you want to migrate them. For example, you may want to pay more special attention to your VIP users, your executives, and migrate more of their data or do a server-side migration for them. Your general office users may have a different requirement. And your field users, maybe if they're working in a factory, for example, don't have the same amount of requirement. The reason why we have this strategy here in place is because migration, like everybody out there, I'm sure in this webinar, if you have dealt with any sort of migration in IT, migration is something that takes time, and there's an investment in migration. So it's your decision how you want to migrate, and usually that's something that you probably spend some time in. So defining a good strategy going forward is very important for the big bang go live that we like to talk about. On the next slide here, what we have is an example of a customer that decided to look at this, and they really said, one size doesn't fit all. I want to spend the majority of my time, which is on my executives, right? We know it's the more costly and complex approach is where we migrate everything. We do it for them, including their archives. Everything is server-side. Whereas for my general office users, I want to give them the options to migrate their live mail. I want to give them the options to migrate their own calendars, but they are responsible for it. There's some costs here, but there's less complexity because you're giving the users the option to do that. And maybe for the deskless user, the factory worker, you're just migrating their contacts. A lot of them are perhaps just getting broadcast messages. They don't check emails often. So you don't want to invest too much of your time making sure that they're working. So I think the point that we have here is that one size doesn't fit all, and it's very good to lock down that migration strategy early on and stick to that migration strategy. So I'm going to breeze through this slide right now so we have times for questions. This is the transition approach, what we like to call coexistence. What do you have in place during the pilot and during the showtime, the go live? There's a few considerations that you have to think about. Mail flow being one of them. If you have to deliver your messages to Exchange first and then to Google Apps, in case your users are still using both systems, there are considerations that you have to think about here. You have to configure your existing system to do that. We have a lot of this information in our website, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. And we also have a pilot guide that describes this in detail as well. We had a question about how do we allow our users to use Google Apps and still work with users in Exchange. From a calendar perspective, we have calendar interop tools that you can install in your Exchange server to do free busy lookups, to look up conference room information, and et cetera. Those tools are available and they're free. They're in our code website, and again, our deployment guide talks about this. And we also have some work necessary here for some directory integration. That's really, from our perspective, the way we see it, it's GAL synchronization, is when you want all of your Google Apps users to have access to all of the other users in your organization, regardless if they're in Google Apps or not. And this is all usually done through our Google Apps Directory Sync tool, where you can synchronize profiles, which is users' rich information like their phone numbers and addresses. You can synchronize other contacts like help desk and groups, and you can also synchronize contacts that are not a part of your Google Apps instance yet. So this is your transition approach. A lot more information. We have very good documentation on this. But I'm going to be moving on to the next slide with what that is change management and training and communication. We have here, we describe 3 phases really to training and communications. The planning aspect of training and communication, what do you do during the deployment, and what do you do after the deployment? Because it's important to keep the users happy and making sure that that they're using the system and you did a good job. So usually during the planning, we have a concept of something called Google Guides and Early Adopter Program. And what the Google Guides and Early Adopter Programs are usually people in your organization that are interested in Google Apps. They are from not only from IT, but from other areas of the business that are interested in Google Apps and are willing to help you get your users getting users happy about Google Apps, get them excited about Google Apps, but also make them feel like there's somebody there for them as well if there is an issue. Apart from this early adopter program, we recommend developing a training strategy. There are several training strategies out there. We have documentation on our website. We also have several partners that do things like training the trainer, webinars to help your users get up to speed in Google Apps as fast as they can. And of course, there's some marketing and awareness that you want to build. You want some enthusiasm, and you want to make sure that people see that this is coming, and you want to make this a positive message, right? Every change in IT, it can be disruptive, and you want to make sure that there's a positive message around it. During the deployment, it's communicating early, often, in different ways. You don't want the users knowing that there will always be an email coming at the exact same time every single day. You want to keep changing a little bit so you still have users' attention and awareness, but at the same time, they're still engaged and you're still giving them bite-sized chunks of tips and helping them, during the transition phase. You want to make sure, of course, that you have support ready for any users' questions that come in. And, of course, usually during showtime, we have, a command center where not everybody from IT, but a good number of IT and a good number of people from your project team are involved in making sure that the questions get answered right away, and your users are happy and they feel that there's support in place. And of course, after it's deployed, what I mentioned a little bit earlier, feedback, getting user feedback, surveys. You can use even Google Spreadsheets and Google Forms to do surveys with your users. Help them with some refresher trainings. Showcase some good examples of Google Apps, and if there's any common questions that come up, give them some guidance and guidance for your organization. How can you do this so you save some time? So that's a training piece. I think we are almost wrapping up. I'm going to pass to Dan here, who has a couple slides, I think, left. So go, Dan.
Thanks, Marcelo. So, hey, guys, I know we want to get to the question. I wanted to put one slide in here. We've got a very large number of questions from the user audience today about, I run a financial company. I'm in charge of a healthcare company. I run IT for a school. So I wanted to throw a slide in here that could speak to a lot of those questions about, and the question with those are, what's the best way for me to do it? I have 500 users. I have 10,000 users. So I wanted to throw a slide in here that talked a little bit to how we did it at an actual customer. So what I've done is I've got a high-tech hardware manufacturer, so cutting-edge technology, very, very high-end, very savvy users in some regards, and then in other regards, users that aren't part of the technical community. What their environment, they ran Exchange 2003 with Exchange 2007. They had begun a deployment of 2007, identified that cost was a little bit prohibitive, identified that maybe they weren't getting the same bang for the buck that they were paying, so they started evaluating apps. They had 15,000 users. There were over 50 worldwide locations. So the first thing they did was they went through a scope, created a scope document, kind of like we talked about. And if you remember the slide that Marcelo displayed earlier, it talked about where is your core focus and what pieces of the application are your core, Gmail, Talk, Calendar, and they had taken right from that slide and identified those as the core pieces. And then what was going to also launch, but maybe, they weren't the priority for the early parts, docs, sites, video, things like that. So those were also in their deployment a soft launch part of the deployment where everything was available to the users, but they weren't giving as much training. They weren't putting as much communication around it. So it was a softer launch that the users had access to. They could holistically start getting department by department velocity on something like that. They were going to roll out to all employees, and they were going to deploy Postini. Those were, and of course, this is being very simplistic in some of this because, of course, inside the scope document there are tons and tons of pieces of information that you want to always be tracking. But these were really the highlights. These are the things we needed to accomplish throughout the deployment process. The pilot approach was that we had a user population of about 200 users from all over the business. They used split delivery that I presented earlier using Postini, and they used a partner for training and partner templates. So what they had actually was they had a training partner deployed to key locations around the globe that they were then able to get big batches of users into the trainings. They had people on site in each of their main locations and geographic regions for a couple days, and told users, hey, when you have your hour, you go in, and they're going to be staggered throughout the days, and that's how they accomplished doing their training. Their approach for deployment was what we talked about earlier was the big bang. This particular company, it took about 8 business days to deploy all 15,000 users across the world in a kind of follow-the-sun type of mentality with conference rooms set up for kind of the quote-unquote war room where anybody who had any issue could call into a centralized war room that was staffed for several days so that any of the regional command centers, so the traditional IT staff that would help and who were already specially trained, could help the users inside those regions. But now that local support staff had a group of Google Apps experts waiting and available at all times to get their questions answered. So that was the global big bang. Users were added using Google Apps Directory Sync, and I'm going to be getting to a couple questions that have come in on Google Apps Directory Sync that I've seen. So if you had a question on that, hopefully I'll be talking to some of those here coming up. Users were allowed access to Gmail 2 weeks prior to the rollout. One of the things we've learned here is that when users are getting trained on an application like Gmail, letting them have access to it early on, even before mail starts flowing to it, especially to exercise some of the techniques that they've learned in the training is an excellent idea. So giving access to Gmail 2 weeks prior to the rollout was a decision that this company made, and it worked wonders because now when the users went into the system, it was something they were already familiar with. They were already playing around with some of the settings and looking at some of the lab features and things like that, so that worked out very well. As Marcelo talked about, we have several different ways that you can do data migration, and what these guys decided to do was to use server-side migration for their executives and VIPs and client-side for their general office users, which we've seen over and over again. It generally provides a very, very solid approach. So for those of you guys who were asking questions about this is how, this is what my company is, this industry with this many users, this is a good template that you can kind of see how a customer has done it in the past. And lastly, we've talked a little bit about the website that we have, and this is, I wanted to definitely give you guys this. Hopefully, if we look at the analytics behind this website, we'll be seeing that a nice bump in traffic from all of you guys. Deployment.googleapps.com. I went through the site. I've been through the site a million times, and I went through it before this presentation because I wanted to, have a couple things that I could just say. If people went to this webinar and they listened to, what we have to say and they're interested in Google Apps, what are some of the topics that they could pull out if they went to this website? And I just wanted to give you guys a couple of the things that are on this website, that might help you. I mean, things like the Enterprise Deployment Guide. If you're looking at seriously deploying Google Apps into your company, into your organization, I don't know if there could be a better titled document that gives you all the pieces of detail that you need in order to successfully go from point A to point B and be able to turn off your legacy mail servers, your existing infrastructure, and fully move to Google Apps. The Enterprise Deployment Guide is kind of a one-stop shop. It's an excellent document. I highly recommend that. We have checklists for the deployment so that you don't overlook anything, so you don't miss anything because you haven't done this before. Let us help you, give you, this is what customers have done before. All these pieces, if you can check right down the list off on these pieces, you're going to be successful. Training seminars already developed for you. How to set up Google Guides programs. How to build enthusiasm. Kind of the marketing piece. A lot of us are technical people. We understand MX records. We understand directory sync, but we don't understand how to get people excited maybe. So how to build a program around that. Webcasts like this on how to do certain topics. You want to learn more about GBES. You want to learn more about Google Apps Sync for Microsoft Outlook. Some of those topics already taken care of for you. Communication templates. When to send and what to send to your end users. User guides. So want to teach somebody how to, give them a two-page handout on Gmail or Calendar. These kind of guides already developed to hand to your end users in very layman terms so that you're not talking to the most technical person. Well, that's great. We've already got some very simple, easy to follow, picture-laden, resources. And then, of course, resources and training for your help desk, which we're going to have questions come up. How to specially train your help desk, how to get them going. So please take a look at this. I highly recommend this website. There's a lot of different resources for you. And with that, our pieces are done, and I'm going to hand it back to Serena, who's just going to take you through a few things, and we're going to definitely jump into a bunch of questions.
Thanks, Dan. Just real quickly, in addition to the deployment team specialists who have been speaking here, and obviously who we also have working on customer deployments, we have a large ecosystem of partners, some of whom are listed here, that can help you with some of the activities that Dan and Marcelo just described if you feel like you need to augment your own internal resources. Additionally, I've seen a lot of questions come up about customers, following up on what Dan was saying. We're a customer of XYZ size. We're in such and such an industry. One of the things that I would like to encourage everyone to do is search out our customer webcast series. Twice a month, we feature a customer speaker talk about their decision to move to Google Apps, as well as how they went about the planning process and how they executed their deployment. So if you're a large company, 10,000 users, there are several examples of companies who did the Big Bang migration that Dan and Marcelo just described. For example, Johnson Diversey had migrated, I think it was 12,000 employees from Lotus Notes Domino over a 2-day period in a follow-the-sun mode, as Dan mentioned. We've also had Sanmina SCI, who migrated 15,000 employees from Exchange 2003, talk about their deployment recently, and Fairchild Semiconductor as well describing how they actually used executives and admin assistants in the pilot group and how that helped achieve their success. If you're an EDU or a 501c3 nonprofit user in the United States, we do have Google Apps Education Edition that is free if you're an EDU organization or a 501c3 in the United States. And in those instances, we do have very large deployments because we're often talking about student bodies of 40,000, 80,000, 100,000 in size. And there are some webcasts that describe the deployment processes they went to. I do see some K-12 customers online as well, and it's a very similar process for students as well as faculty. One thing to note, again, just to clarify for folks out there, what Dan and Marcel have been saying is we provide the tools and services so that you can decide what the best approach is for you, whether you're 5,000 users, as James was asking about, how long should it take? It really depends, and we hope that the information that we provide in these webcasts help you determine what is best for your company. And James, I'll turn back over to you so we can get to some questions.
Yeah, we're going to go over the top of the hour by about 5 minutes or so here to squeeze in some of these questions. We do have some related resources on the right-hand side of the player, which I encourage you to click on. I'm putting out one last poll question. Really, this gives us some feedback so as we follow up with you after the event. We know some of the topic areas that you want some more information, current levels of enterprise adoption, security, et cetera. So we'll leave this up for a moment so you can do on that. Dan, let me actually bring it right back to you, taking Aaron's question, but as you mentioned, a lot of questions in here about Google Apps Directory Sync and things like that. Take a moment here and talk about Directory Sync and go into a little more detail like you wanted to.
Sure. So we've had some questions around the protocols used and can I do, what if I want to just run a test pilot? So let's talk first off. Anytime we're coming through the cloud, we are using a secure connection over SSL. So some of the other questions were what other ports would come into play here from a network standpoint, things like that. The only other ports we use are LDAP ports. It can be standard 389 or it can be a secure LDAP port. Another question that came in was about can I just sync to one specific little place to try and pull like one or two users and do automation and things like that? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can do that. Very, very configurable tool. So a couple of really good questions there.
All right,
and I think, Dan, just to augment Dan's point on Christy's question, the DSS runs inside of your network. So from a network perspective, you usually don't have to open from a firewall perspective, you don't have to open any ports to your LDAP system since the tool sits inside of your network. So when we use port 389 and 636, they're actually inside of your network, so there's usually not a firewall there, but then the tool communicates to Google in the cloud.
Marcelo, we'll keep it with you. Matthew wanted to know about the single sign-on products that Google Apps works with, Obelix, Novell. Does it matter? What we do, we are SAML 2.0 compliant. As long as you have a SAML 2.0 compliant tool, I'm not 100% familiar on those exact ones. We have a lot of partners out there that have SAML 2.0. They're open source projects, and there are a lot of companies out there, perhaps like Novell, that already support SAML 2.0. So we follow a standard protocol. All right, appreciate that. Again, back on the screen, some URLs that you can take a look at. Folks have been asking if we've recorded today's presentation, and yes, we have. So if you missed anything, you joined us late, you will all get reminder emails bringing you back to the on-demand version starting tomorrow. So look for that coming in here. We talked a little bit about mobility and things like that. Rich wanting to know, is there a separate charge for each mobile device, BlackBerry, Android, et cetera, that will be accessing the domain? Dan, can you address that for us?
Sure, absolutely not. One of the things that we try to strive for is to not have any hidden costs in our product line. So, whether you have 2 Androids or 10,000 BlackBerries that are going to be accessing, from our perspective, there is not. In terms of that, if you run GBES, we do run off the base RIM product so that we can support the base RIM product, BlackBerry Enterprise Server, so there is that piece of it. But other than that, we do not have a charge fee for devices on our domain.
Dan, I don't believe we went over it, although I've heard this on a lot of the Google customer events that we've done. And again, I encourage, as Serena did, for folks to look for those on Tech Republic, register for those, and give you really good insights into folks that are in your position as well, what they've gone through, give you some insights on what you might do. But question that comes up a lot, Ron addressing it today, is there a shared corporate address book? If so, is that integrated with Active Directory?
So there is a corporate address book for the different platforms, and it can be, based on how you put your address book into Google, that will determine which usually a company, if they have an Active Directory, will incorporate that via Google Apps Directory Sync, and then that can be utilized on the mobile platform as well.
Marcelo Lewis on board with us wants to know kind of for the users out there, can you send users to a Google site web page as a welcome page when they log on in?
You would have full control of the user login experience when you use single sign-on. That is one option. You can also customize some of the colors of your sign-on page. But if you want to display any sort of disclaimer or any additional information, with single sign-on, you have full control of that.
Gotcha. And Dan, I saw a question in here. I'm scrolling back up to it here. You mentioned kind of one of the deployments. Serena was talking about some of the customers from large to small. Jennifer and a few others were trying to really get into the size company that you've seen benefiting most from Google Apps. Is there a difference between the large and the small company that goes forward?
There's really not a big difference in terms of the productivity benefits, the gains from the cost perspective that you get when you go to Google Apps. We've seen companies, with two employees all the way up to hundreds of thousands of employees deploy Google Apps, and they all are very happy and, of course, get the same kind of user experience and the same benefits that the other ones did.
I was looking today in the queue and some of the questions. We had folks that have 15 or so folks they want to move over all the way up to a minimum of some at 5,000 and above they're looking. So, again, a broad range of interest. For our audience, I do have one final interactive component I want to push out to everybody. A quick little survey gives us some feedback about today's presentation. So if you can have your pop-up blockers disabled or hit the Control-C button right now, I'll go ahead and push that survey out to everybody. Just 6 questions or so on there. Again, gives us a little feedback about today's presentation, and appreciate you all taking a moment to answer that. 1 or 2 other questions that we'll get to, then we'll be wrapping things up. The rest of these questions are going to have to be dealt with kind of offline, if you will. Russell, interesting one here, Marcelo, dealing with executive assistants. Often they are having to manage contacts and the email, the calendar of their executives. How is that handled when folks move to Google Apps?
We have 2 options. You can delegate Gmail through email delegation. That's a feature that just launched not too long ago, and something that we have a very good feedback on. And we also have calendar delegation, where the calendar can have full access to somebody else's calendar for managing their calendar. So we have support for that, and we have good feedback on that too.
All right, cool. Hey, we're going to cut it off at that point. What we will do, folks, is we're going to take the remainder of the questions that have come in, and we will get those over to the Google team and work on getting some responses back out to you in some form, whether it'll be through some postings or whether it'll be through individual responses. We're going to work to try and get some of those answers out to you. Back on the screen, some contact information. If you want to download a copy of today's presentation, just click the download slides. You'll get a PDF of the presentation. It'll have these links in there as well, and we've made these links available on the right-hand side of the player. I'm going to keep that player open for just a couple more minutes here, so you can click around there if you need to. Again, if you have a final question or comment that you want to submit to the team, feel free to do so at this time. We'll gather that in our report and get it over to them. My thanks again to Dan and Marcelo for taking time, being on board, Serena as well. We'll put good wishes out to Jim Copeland. Hopefully he'll be able to join us next time around. And for all of you, our attendees, really do appreciate you taking so much time to, one, join us for the event, go over a little bit on time, and ask so many great questions. We'll do our best to get some responses back out to you. With that, we'll wrap things up. Again, my name is James Hilliard, and we do look forward to talking to you down the road.